I see myself as a person first, a human first. Yes, I have a visible disability. I have conditions that are invisible that disable me. I'm a woman. I'm a Muslim. I'm somebody who's Asian, who has Pakistani heritage. I was born in Luxembourg. I lived in China. I'm a world citizen. You know, in the last 10 years, I've probably moved house 10 times. You know, I've had a fairly varied life experience. I'm also somebody who's lived through cancer. I mean, those are all bits of my identity that form the me I choose to be today. But it's interesting to see that when I talk to people, depending on who I talk to, often disability is immediately the first identity they go to. Very rarely am I asked, what's it like being a Muslim and climbing? What's it like being a brown person and climbing? Climbing is a sport that's, while it's very good from a LGBT plus perspective or from a gender perspective, it's also good. It's still quite a white sport and still quite an able sport, and yet disability is always going to be the first question. I don't like the word. I wish we had a better word. When I was growing up, I'd consider myself differently abled because while I was missing my right arm below the elbow, like I was born with that. I didn't need to adapt to a loss. And as a consequence for me, like if I had to carry my plate to the kitchen like everybody else, I'd just find a different way of doing it. And yeah, I might have to do something slightly unorthodox to get it done, but I'll get it done. And also, my parents are amazing. They never taught me that my arm was ever a disability. They were always like, you will do the same as everybody else, and if anything, we will make sure you do more, so nobody ever sees you as disabled. And so that was always very ingrained into me. But then, you know, as a teenager, that's when probably the disability identity became a thing, when I realized others saw me as disabled, and by disabled, they saw me as less able. And it was the first time I realized that people might see me as less of a person because I'm missing something visible. And I was like, but that makes no sense because everybody is less good at something naturally. Like somebody might not be great at managing their anger, or somebody might, you know, not be great at doing maths, or somebody might just struggle learning languages. That doesn't mean they're disabled. I'm missing a bit of an arm. Like, why is that seen as so much more of a disability than somebody who can't work out how much their shopping is in a basket because they literally don't have the math skills? It's just as disabling, technically. So I think it's been interesting because, again, my parents' attitude, my sort of immediate family was sort of like, you can do anything you put your mind to. So in that sense, I never really felt that disability was a thing within my own family in any case. But there was always this element of needing to look right. So I used to have a prosthetic that kind of looked like me, but it wasn't really like me because, I had to also wear it every single day as a kid. But until I sort of turned 12, my dad went, you're adultish enough now to make your own choices. And I went straight into the corner. And I didn't wear it again for years. But it was one of these things where, the arm is a certain skin color. You can't change the skin color. And half of the year, you're going to be lighter than it because it's sunny or winterish. And the other half, it never looks right. I mean, the nails don't grow on it. It has no hair. It has no veins. I mean, how on earth does that make me look any more normal? If anything, it attracts a lot of people's attention. And that's why I sort of really hated my arms, because I'm like, I was forced to wear them because they make me look more normal. And yeah, I felt uncomfortable in them because, especially when I was wearing them in Pakistan, going home to see family, they're incredibly sweaty at that point. They're itchy, they fall off. And then at that point, you're like, an hour into somebody's wedding, you have to take your arm off and hide it and hope that the aunties won't faint because you've suddenly taken your arm off at a ceremony, right? Like, what's more awkward, not wearing it at all or wearing it and potentially causing a scene? That was an issue for me, and it still is. Like, I still get asked, aren't you wearing your arm to a thing? And I'm like, why? Why would I wear something that makes me incredibly uncomfortable? I mean, I use arms now. I have an arm to help me in the gym, so a strength training arm. I call her my strong arm. And I have another one that's shorter for different things, and it's got a Spider-Man's costume on it. Call her my spider arm. And I specifically once I found out I was allowed to change, so on the NHS here, you're allowed to literally design it how you want. You've got choices of skins, basically. And I deliberately chose not skin color because I was like, these are my tools. They're an extension of me, and therefore they're an extension of my personality. They're there to help me for certain things. So I want them to look absolutely awesome because they're going to help me do absolutely awesome things. And the amazing thing about them is that if I ever wear them and people are watching me, I find people stare less when they see an arm that's funkily colored because they're like, hey, she's missing an arm. Hey, she's using something to help her. Let her get on with it. Rather than, oh, that's kind of trying to look real, but it's not really. What's wrong with, oh, and they'll just stare. You're on a tube and they'll just stare for the entire journey, trying to work out exactly what's wrong, but not wanting to ask the question because they don't want to do anything politically incorrect. So awkward. I genuinely think people see me as having a disability first. Whether they see me as disabled as a consequence or not, so less able, is another question, and I'm not entirely sure there. And to a certain extent, I've used that to my advantage in becoming more of an advocate, more of a role model in that space. So while people might see that as being a problem, I've just used it as a silver lining and gone, hey, do you know what? I'm going to be that role model and be that person that, you need to have that person you can see so other people can see that they can do things. But yeah, it is a bit annoying that people sort of go to disability first or go to the visible thing. So if it's not disability, it's Muslim. If it's not Muslim, it's Asian. And it's just like, wait a minute. Or if it's not that, it's woman. It's like, why not human? Why not person first? It's interesting because, especially with sort of the public career I've taken on in the last few years, I don't engage very much with the Southeast Asian community at all. And I'm really confused as to why. I think people do really struggle with disability and the concept. I keep getting told I'm really inspirational, but nobody can really pinpoint why or what it is. And for me, inspirational is one of those words. I can understand why people use it. I'm not entirely sure I agree with it. I'm not inspirational for getting out of bed every day. I'm not inspirational for going to work every day. I might be inspirational for doing something incredibly badass on the wall. I'll take that one. Because that's something that you're facing a fear, you're showing it's a journey for you. But I think in the Southeast Asian community, at least from what I've seen and what I've experienced, it still seems to be, oh my God, I couldn't imagine living like you. And it's still that space. Disability kind of means less ability or a struggle to live a normal life ability. And it's like, it's kind of like, I would really love to shift that conversation there. Yeah. In the non-Asian communities that I talk to, and I speak to a lot more of them, I'd guess, the conversation's shifting. So instead of people calling me inspirational, they might call me brilliant, which I prefer, or a role model, or something that suits my character as such. It's not always disability first now. It's just different, and it's not a, oh my God, you have a disability, how do you function? Sometimes it is, oh my God, you have a disability, how do you function? But then I actively share my journey and people do genuinely wonder how I function some days. And I appreciate that, because that is a case sometimes. But it's more of a, how are you using it to your advantage and how are you using it to help your community? So it all happened quite by accident. As a kid, as a teenager, I used to do a lot of charity work. It's something I really enjoy doing. I like giving and I like being a change maker. So that was something that was inherent as a trait, personality trait, but wasn't something I'd actively pursued. About 4 years ago, This Girl Can, the campaign run by Sport England to try and get women and girls more active in sport, tweeted out wanting examples of people trying a new sport, and I happened to have just gotten into climbing at the time. And so I offered to write a blog series for them. And I didn't talk about disability, I didn't talk about any about that. I talked about the fear of trying something new and being bad at it and looking bad. So, the awkwardness of wearing new clothes or the tightness of a harness that might be around your bum and you feeling really awkward about how big your bum is. The really typical things that everybody gets scared about. Or, going to a yoga class for the first time and doing something really wrong, but actually you're new, so you will do wrong things. And it was so relatable that people were like, oh my God, we want you to write more. And I started winning awards from those This Girl Can blogs and suddenly got put into the spotlight. And interestingly enough, it was very much so the white community that picked up on this. And I sort of, from that, sort of started going into more of the disability space. So how much harder it is for somebody who's limb different to get into the gym. Because you have no idea how you're going to deadlift, or, you know, you can't really go into a strength training class because you don't know how you're going to do it. So then you're going to have to privately pay for a personal trainer, but they cost like £40 an hour minimum, right? But the problem with that is, you know, 20% of the English population at the moment is declared having a disability. 50% of those with declared disabilities are unemployed. Now, you think about that and the cost of £40 an hour, and knowing that Scope have recently said that a person with a disability will probably spend at least £300 more a month on average to just meet standard living. So I will need to use an Uber more a month, or a taxi. I will need to do online shopping. I will need to spend a little bit more just to manage to get my day done, not even looking at luxuries or any of that. So if you think about that, £40 an hour to try and get fitter is really expensive, but you have no choice but to go into a one-to-one session because you won't join, you know, how do you work out how to do a deadlift? You know, how do you make sure you can squat in good form? You can't do that without some actual personal attention. And so I started raising those issues. I started talking about it because I wanted to get into the gym and I was struggling to do it. And I started talking about the fear of, you know, how to find a trainer who would accept the fact that he needed to work around, or she would need to work around the various issues I have. So I'm not just missing my right arm below the elbow. I have a syndrome called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It means my joints spontaneously dislocate, and it's also impacting sort of my internal organs. I also had cancer 8 years ago, so there's some lingering side effects from that. So there's you know, and I now have inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a fair amount of things going on in my body, which mean, you know, getting to the gym can be quite a challenge, and then doing stuff in the gym can be even more challenging. So yeah, from that I became an ambassador for Limb Power, so the leading amputee and limb different charity for sport and art in the UK. I then became an ambassador for Ehlers-Danlos UK, just because I literally talk about EDS on a really regular basis. So from exercises I might do at home, to slow wound healing, to the various challenges around eating. So I became an ambassador for those two charities. And because I climb, and because I talked about the climbing and the fact that I'm a civil servant, I then got approached by the Grit and Rock Foundation. And they are a project set up by another climber who holds 2 Guinness World Records. So kind of like I'm in awe of her, the fact that she even approached me. It's like, woo, okay, fangirl much? And she set up a project to pilot taking girls from deprived backgrounds, mainly Muslims, to try climbing once a week in an indoor climbing wall, with a trip to France or like Scotland or Wales for 1 week a year, in a bid to try and get them to stop dropping out of school and learn to believe in their own potential, rather than potential that people have set them to have. And they've had an incredible success in the number of like people going to uni from that. So people are actually starting to go to uni from those girls. And I would go and speak at those schools because, you know, what better than to have somebody from their own religion, you know, talk to them, which was fun. I've loved watching the jaws drop when they go, "Oh my God, you climb!" I'm like, yeah, I climb. Not only that, I compete nationally, which is more than any of these girls are doing in terms of the competitive space. So very different experience to those girls. So I did that, and then I started competing in my first year of climbing and started ranking nationally as a consequence of that. And one of the things that the paraclimber, so we call ourselves paraclimbers because we do paraclimbing, so disabled climbing. We essentially climb exactly the same stuff, we just do it with less limbs or less things. And one of the things that came out from those comps was we'd meet each other at the comps, we'd stress at the comps, but we'd make really good friends, and then we'd not see each other for the rest of the year. Now, in every single other climbing wall in London and around the UK, you have women's sessions, you have men's sessions, you have queer-friendly sessions, you have all of these, but there are no disability-friendly social sessions. So if you want a disability session, it's got to be a one-to-one, or it's got to be a specific, it's quite medicalized. Like, people go and paint when they want to do it as a group, but it's art therapy for somebody who's got a disability. People want to do sports, it's great, but it's walking therapy for somebody with a disability. So it's very therapeutic when it comes to everything that becomes a group thing. So with a friend of mine, I set up Para Climbing London. So it's literally us setting up social sessions in London for anybody who wants to try climbing for their first time, or even wants to come and meet other climbers and are too scared to try climbing. Doesn't matter, just turn up. No pressure. We'll even buy you tea. And you go from that, and we've had everybody from people who've never tried climbing, wheelchair users, blind people, all sorts, to now we have 3 Team GB members in our Paraclimbing London. And 2 of them were found via Paraclimbing London. So we're kind of chuffed, because we're going from absolute grassroots to elite level world champions. Talk. Like it or not, we have to talk. And it has to be uncomfortable. We have to talk about the feelings, what it feels like to be called disabled, what it feels like to feel like you're less able. Like it's things like, when I'm talking to somebody who's not from our community, people will talk about what I do as a job, or, you know, how's the weather, or really nice things, or easy things. When I come into my communities, oh, you've gained weight, you've lost weight. Oh, you know, how are you going to find a husband? Or, you know, how are you going to manage at home? It's automatically, even though it comes from a really good intention, it's judgmental. Like, why do I have to justify my life to anybody? Why is it that I have to do that over anybody else? You know, I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. It means I get facial hair. And to keep it maintained, it's actually quite a tough job to, you know, keep waxing it and whatever else. So I let it grow out from time to time, because, you know what, it's too much of a faff. And honestly, my job does not care. They care that I turn up and I do my job. They don't care what I look like, as long as I look respectable. And to them, having facial hair is not an issue. But if I turn up in my own community with a piece of facial hair out of place, if they don't tell me, they'll tell my family. And I'm just like, wait a minute, why is this so, why are outer appearances so important? Why can't I just come and look run down one day? Why do I have to feel really run down because I'm not feeling well, and yet turn up perfectly made up and perfectly dressed? Why do impressions count so much? I think that's it. I think it's conversation. It's being open-minded as well. I think it's genuinely a generational thing as well. I think now that we're getting to a point where, you know, we're no longer first generation kids in the UK or around. My parents used to live in the UK. They were first generation before they had me in Luxembourg. So I'm second generation for all intents and purposes. And I think the mixing of multiple identities means I have more permission within myself to then start exploring things that we would never have done previously. So I think that's partly it, but I also think the people around me are starting to become more open-minded because they're reading what I write. And they're like, we didn't realize. Because nobody talks about it. I'm like, okay, fine, now you know. Now you know how difficult a day can be. Crohn's and Colitis UK, I'm really tempted to try this. I haven't tried it yet. Apparently they have an app where somebody else, like a friend or a family member, downloads it, and they get to walk in your shoes what it's like living with inflammatory bowel disease. And I love the concept. I've not tried it. I have no idea how it works. I've heard really good feedback from other people who've tried it. But I'd love to try that on people and just say, well, why don't you try living like me for a day? And see what it feels like. I mean, you're not living like me, you're not experiencing it, but at least you're sort of getting told all the symptoms and whatever else is going on. You know, then, you know, if I don't put a good face on at the end of the day, maybe there's a reason for it. Don't let your perception of identity limit anybody's potential. I think that's it. Everybody has more potential than they realize. And if societal constructs are going to stop that potential being reached, then that's a damn shame. If it's just somebody else's beliefs that's going to stop you from getting to where you should be, that's a waste. And the other thing is conversation. Keep talking, keep talking, keep talking, and keep being really open-minded. Be prepared to walk into the uncomfortable.